So if you've been looking at homes for sale very long, you've probably seen at least one reference to HOA fees or CDD fees, and probably a whole lot more than one. And maybe you've wondered what the heck they are or what the difference between them is. And even if you haven't, somebody else here probably has, so that's what we're going to be talking about today. Hi there, and welcome back to my channel. In case you're new here, I'm Stephanie Frost, and I'm a realtor here in Ocala, Florida. And this is where I talk about all things real estate in the Ocala and Marion County area. And just so you don't miss out on anything good that I might actually come up with, because I actually do come up with some good stuff now and then, just hit the subscribe button, will you? So what are HOA fees and CDD fees, and how are they different? And is it always a one or the other kind of situation, or am I likely to be stuck with both of them? Well, let's find out. First up, the CDD fee. And full disclosure, we don't have a whole lot of CDD communities here in Ocala. At least not yet, although I'm sure we're probably going to see more of them in the near future. But we do have a few that have CDD fees attached, so you need to be aware of that when you're looking for a home here, because it does make a difference when you're comparing communities. So back to the point at hand. What exactly is a CDD fee, and why do some communities have them? Well, first of all, CDD stands for Community Development District, and a Community Development District is a special entity that develops the land and provides infrastructure and amenities in the community. Community Development Districts offer a developer of a community a cost-effective way of building and maintaining the initial infrastructure of the community. You know, things like roads, sidewalks, water supply, sewers, and building any amenities like parks or recreation centers. Now, the way I understand it, before 1980, local governments would pay for infrastructure like roads and utilities, and then the developer would cover the cost for the sewers, grading, and any amenities that they put in. And as you can imagine, doing it that way was a huge cost to both the developer and to a whole lot of communities too. So in 1980, Florida passed the Uniform Community District Development Act, which allowed for the creation of community development districts. The CDDs are legal entities that can enter into contracts, own property, adopt rules and regulations. They can sue or be sued. They can borrow money, and most importantly, they can issue bonds and levy assessments. They basically operate as tiny, or not so tiny, little independent tax districts. All community development districts are run by a board of supervisors who are elected by the developer, and they issue bonds to pay for the infrastructure and amenities of the community. Then, the homeowners that buy into the community pay those bonds back by way of the CDD fees, which is why you'll sometimes hear CDD fees referred to as bond fees. Now, a couple of things that you need to be aware of about CDD fees is that, one, they are paid yearly on your tax bill, rather than monthly or quarterly like most HOA fees. But, and this is a big but, the CDD fee is not actually part of your property tax. So unlike your property taxes, it's generally not tax deductible. And the second thing is that a lot of times there are two parts to a CDD fee. One part pays back the original bond, usually over a period of between 15 and 30 years, and then it goes away. But the other part is for ongoing operations and maintenance, and it's forever, or at least as long as you own that home. So sometimes you might see a home advertised as bond paid, because the homeowner actually paid the first part of the bond off up front before selling. But you got to know that there might still be another part of that bond that's getting added to the yearly taxes. And that part isn't going away, so you're pretty much married to it. And depending on the community and what amenities it has, CDD fees can range from as little as $500 to over $5,000 a year. So they can be a chunk. Not something you want to be surprised with after closing, that's for sure. So why on earth would you want to buy a home in a community with CDD fees? Because I know that right about now you're thinking, well, it all sounds well and good for the developer, but maybe not so much for me as a prospective home buyer. Well, probably the biggest reason would be that, generally speaking, a CDD lets the developer keep the purchase price of new homes in a CDD community lower because of the deferred infrastructure cost. He isn't paying it out of pocket, so he's not charging for you for it up front either. And as a general rule, you tend to get a lot more amenities and perks in a community that has CDD fees. Because, again, the developer didn't have to shell out up front to build all that stuff. So they likely got a little more fancy with it than they would have otherwise. Now, that isn't always true. But these days, more often than not, it's going to be the case. And now that you know all that, you're probably wondering how to find out if a property has CDD fees attached to it, right? Well, obviously the easiest way is to ask your trusted realtor, or you could look it up in the county tax records. Just look for something called non-ad valorem taxes, and that'll give you an itemized breakdown of the taxes. If there is one, that's where you're going to find it. So now, let's take a look at HOA fees. HOA stands for Homeowners Association, and that's a group of elected residents that are basically the governing body of the community. If you're buying a home in a brand new community where the homes are still under construction, odds are good that the developer still controls the Homeowners Association. Here in Florida, the developer has to turn control over to an elected board when 90% of the units in a community have sold and closed. But regardless of who's in charge of it at the time, the HOA makes and enforces community rules and regulations. And all those are going to be listed in the HOA's Declaration of Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions, also known as the CC&Rs. Now, when you're considering buying into an HOA community, you're definitely going to want to review these first, just to make sure you can live with them. Because once you buy in, you're stuck. And some of them can get pretty downright intrusive, right down to things like whether or not you can park in your own driveway or how many pets you're allowed to have inside your own home. Now, obviously, or maybe not so obviously, when you buy a home in a neighborhood with an HOA, with very few exceptions, membership is going to be mandatory, which means that any HOA fees are going to be mandatory as well. And you'll probably want to check out what those fees cover. In general, HOA fees usually cover things like trash, cable, paying for security guards or activity directors, upkeep of any amenities, and common area maintenance, but it's going to differ from community to community. We have communities here where you get nearly everything provided to you, right down to maintaining your lawn, and some where you pretty much get the pretty sign outside the gate. Typically, HOA fees are paid separately and they are not included in your mortgage. They're usually paid monthly, but in some communities they want them quarterly or ever so often, even yearly. And if you don't pay those HOA dues, well, there are consequences. HOAs have the legal right to put a lien on your home for back dues and even foreclose if it gets to that point. And even if it doesn't get to that point, there are often huge penalties for paying late. I had a client a few years back who only owed about $500 in back dues. But the board filed a lien on her property, so by the time he paid up his dues, he also had to fork over an extra $5,000 in legal fees. Trust me, you don't want that to happen. So why might you want to live in an HOA community? Well, for starters, you're not likely to have a community pool, clubhouse, or access to anything like that without an HOA to pay for maintaining it. And if you're a person who doesn't want to deal with lawn maintenance or even exterior upkeep, you might want to live somewhere where the HOA fees cover all that. And HOA rules will pretty much guarantee that your neighborhood will be well maintained and orderly, which in turn tends to keep your property values up. You can buy a home in the nicest neighborhood possible, but if there are no HOAs to govern how people maintain their homes, it only takes one bad apple to sour the area for everybody. But on the other hand, if you're a bit of a rebel like me and can't stand the thought of anybody telling you what to do with your own property, well then, an HOA community probably isn't going to work for you. Okay, so now that you know a bit more about the difference between CDDs and HOAs, did you know that a community can have CDD fees and HOA fees? Yup. Since CDD fees relate to infrastructure and infrastructure maintenance, not to mention paying back that bond, and HOA fees generally cover amenities and such, it's entirely possible that any given community can have both at once. So make sure that you know what you're getting into ahead of time. And as always, if you have any questions about CDDs or HOAs or any of those other alphabet things, or if you're thinking about buying or selling a home here in the Marion County area, I'm here for you. Just get in touch and let's get started.